So firstly, a disclaimer that we do not encourage or facilitate the use of illegal psychedelics. We are also recording this webinar, which will be published on our YouTube channel, and we will share a link with that afterwards. We also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. Now, Australia has hit a crisis point. We now have 1 in 5 Australians who have got a chronic mental condition. 1 in 8 Australians are now on antidepressants. During COVID, there were reports of GPs giving children as young as 10 years old antidepressants. And unfortunately, approximately 1 in 2 Australians will experience some sort of mental condition during the course of their lifetime. Now, the most common conditions are PTSD, anxiety, depression, and also substance abuse. Now, these numbers were taken prior to last summer's bushfires and also prior to COVID. So one can surmise that, unfortunately, these numbers will only increase over time unless we get innovative treatments introduced. So there's been no improvement to the treatment outcomes over the past 50 years. In regards to depression, only 35% of sufferers actually show some signs of getting better, but then 50 to 80% of patients actually relapse after they stop taking antidepressants. So it's this ongoing cycle. And unfortunately, antidepressants have got side effects as well. And then PTSD is even harder to treat, where only 20 to 30% of sufferers show some sort of response, and only 50% of patients actually respond to treatments at all. So therefore, a more of the same approach is not going to solve the problem, and we need to introduce innovative treatments. So that's why My Medicine Australia has been established. We are now just over 2 years old, and our founders, Tanya de Jong and Peter Hunt, have founded 5 charities between them. We are a registered charity, and we are looking at expanding the treatment options available to medical practitioners and also their patients to treat chronic mental health conditions. Our primary focus is on using psilocybin for depression and also medicinal MDMA to treat PTSD. We are measuring our success on 3 main platforms. Number one, that these treatments become part and parcel of the normal healthcare system. Number 2, we see a huge improvement in the numbers that are presented earlier. And also, we want these medicines to become accessible and affordable to everybody who needs them, regardless of the demographic and their socio-economic background as well. Our primary focus, like I said, is on using psilocybin to treat depression and also MDMA to treat PTSD. Both medicines have shown remarkable signs to treat these. A person only needs 2 to 3 dose sessions, in contrast to ongoing medication. And also the medicines themselves have been shown to be curative. Both MDMA and also psilocybin have been granted FDA breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA in the States. And we're hoping that MDMA will become prescribable in the States. And I'm sure Saj will speak about this sometime this calendar year or at least early 2022. In regards to psilocybin, and this is one of our best pictures. So psilocybin actually alters the way the brain communicates with other parts of it. And it enables a patient to break out of their rigid thinking, and it allows the neural pathways in the brain to start speaking to each other. And it promotes creativity, and it promotes a person to then break out of their rigid forms of thinking and the, I guess, the negative and depressive thoughts that were keeping them from flourishing. And this graph was taken from the Beckley Foundation, and one can actually see how under the influence of psilocybin, person's brain just lights up. Compare that to a placebo. So there is some sort of activity, but it's a lot less. And finally, in regards to our 4 key pillars, so MMA runs on 4 platforms. Number 1, we have got awareness and also knowledge building. So doing events like this, which are so important to reach out. And we have guest speakers like Saj. We are also holding an overseas conference in November of this year. And we've also got state chapters throughout the country. At the moment, we've got 25 chapters, and I think over 450 chapter members. It's just phenomenal. And I'll get Kim to post a link to, I will get Kim to post a link in the chat if you guys want to sign up to a chapter and join us. And the chapters are really just a grassroots movement of like-minded individuals. Secondly, we have launched Australia's first certificate in psychedelic training as well. And that course started last week. We have got 2 cohorts each calendar year, and each cohort is made up of 50 students. The first cohort is actually fully subscribed despite COVID. And the practitioners are actually coming to Melbourne this weekend for their first in-service training. And that is a 4-month course over 90 hours. We're also working together with the TGA and also working together with each of the state governments to make a legal and also an ethical framework to get these medicines delivered. We're also sourcing the medicines as well. And finally, we are working on establishing a dedicated center of excellence. And that will be dedicated to psychedelic research. And that will be based in Australia. There are currently only 5 in the world, and we will be looking at establishing the 6th one down under. And also, whilst these sessions are free, we do encourage you to please make a donation to help support us and help us do more of these events. And this can be done via our website. And with that, Saj, I'm going to give it over to you.
Okay, perfect. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so everyone, I am Saj Razvi. I'm a psychotherapist. I've been in private practice since 2005. And in 2014, I became one of the researchers in the MAPS phase 2 trial of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. And you know, we've taught PTSD studies at the graduate level at university. And what we're doing, I'm part of a group now that is working in a somewhat different area than something like, I think, MAPS, or basically, you know, there's a large research movement that's going on in the field to prove these medicines through the FDA here, or the TG. Is it the TGA there,
Yes,
Ilan, or TH?
That's
Okay.
right, the TGA.
TGA. And so our approach is different. We're clinicians. And so what the question that we set out to answer was, how do we fine tune the psychotherapy to best fit with the psychedelic, right? Because these are very different processes. So when you engage in psychotherapy with your ordinary state of consciousness, you know, you're doing things like reality testing, cognitive restructuring, you're gaining insight, you're working with the cognitive belief systems and the meaning structures that you've developed over years and years. And so there's a lot of reality testing when that happens. But when you enter into a psychedelic state of consciousness, you're not in ordinary reality. There's no objective sense of reality that we're reality testing against. And so our approach to this was to say, let's see if we can develop a form of psychotherapy that can make best use of the altered features of consciousness, the altered features of cognition that are part of the psychedelic state. Okay. Okay, so I will also say that because of the brief amount of time we have here tonight, there's a whole lot that I'm not going to be able to touch on. But if you are interested in learning more about the model that I'll be describing in the videos that I'll be showing you guys, you can go to the Journal of Psychedelic Psychiatry and just do a search there for something called the PSIP model. And that's a 35-page paper that I've written. It's a peer-reviewed journal, and it's sort of going through all the research foundations of what how somatic therapies can be useful in the psychedelic space. One other option, if you don't want to read a 35-page paper, is that there was a recent podcast that was on that we really summarized a lot of what's going on there on the research front, and it's called Therapy Chat. And again, just look for me, Saj Razvi. And so for tonight, our focus really wanted to be something much more practical in terms of, what does the work look like and what can we accomplish? So this is very briefly, this is a summation of the current model that's out there. And this is from David Nutt, who you may know. He's well known in the psychedelic research field. He's in charge of the research program at Imperial College in London. And let me read this to you. It's his summation of what I would call the psychedelic integration model, or the sitter model, right? So the drug session itself is given in a room with soft ambient lighting and a comforting soundtrack, which may contribute to the therapeutic value as well. There are generally two therapists present in the room, ideally one male and one female, who are there to provide reassurance, medical cover, and care. This is the important part. They only talk with the patient if the patient wants them to, which they generally do not. It is important to note that there is no expectation of conversation during the trip and no direction by either therapist of the patient's speech or thought. It is the next day in the integration session that the content of the trip is discussed and interpreted, and psychotherapeutic benefits derived, right? So what basically Nutt is saying here is that in the traditional model of psychedelic therapy, the magic happens as a function of the medicine interacting with the client's consciousness. And so, they're wearing eye shades, they're wearing headphones, and so they're effectively isolated. They're effectively in their own reality interacting with the medicine, separate from the clinicians, right? And the therapists in this case really just take a kind of a meditative stance, and they're holding the space for the process to happen. And they might, if the person needs help going to the restroom, they might help there. They may hold their hand if things get scary, but that's about it. There's not much interaction there. And the good news is that, well, this model works, right? Participants reliably show significant benefit using this model. It's a model that's been used since the 1950s. But again, the question is did we happen upon the best model for psychedelic therapy, or can we improve upon it? And so the speculation that we have is that this became the default model because traditional psychotherapy interventions do not pair well with psychedelic states of consciousness, right? Again, you cannot reality test somebody if they're not in reality. It's like trying to reality test somebody who's dreaming, right? They're not in your reality, so there's nothing to base that on. So what we've developed is something that we're referring to as the psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy model. So here are the components of it, right? So it has a biological basis to it, meaning that we see that many of the symptoms that cause people to enter into psychotherapy have autonomic nervous system roots. They have they're biologically based in threat responses that we have to highly stressful or overwhelming situations in our lifetime, right? It's also relational, meaning that it has a lot to do with most people that enter into psychotherapy, and certainly people that have demonstrated treatment resistance. We're not talking about single event traumatic episodes here. We're talking about complex early childhood, repeated PTSD that happened in a person's family of origin, right? So in that case, it's much more sophisticated developmental trauma that we're talking about. So contrast to what, say, happens at Johns Hopkins or some of the other clinical trials is that we're not looking for transpersonal or even mystical experiences. We're looking to keep the person in a very human realm, in a very biographical realm for themselves, right? Let me just move ahead here simply because of time, but I will comment on point E here at the bottom. Processing is not medicine specific, right? So in other words, the suggestion that I'd like to make here is that the type of therapeutic interventions that are appropriate, the type that we're going to be discussing tonight, are not specific to any one medicine. The basic idea is that the more of your being that you can have available to you in that psychedelic journey, the better you are off, right? So in other words, you can take a psychedelic and talk your way through an entire 8 hours of MDMA, and it will be beneficial. There's no doubt about it. But the idea is we are so much more than our conscious, rational, verbal minds. We are bodies, we are emotions, we are nervous systems that have a great deal of deep programming to them. And so the more of yourself that you can bring to the psychedelic state, the better. That's what we're saying here. Having said that, as a very rough overview, let me show you guys some video clips that we have from a pilot study that we ran with combat veterans. Okay, and this happens to be with in the U.S. the two psychedelics that are widely and legally available to us right now are cannabis and ketamine. And you may think to yourself, wait a minute, cannabis is not a psychedelic. And I beg to differ. We find that cannabis is mostly used, like any psychedelic, cannabis is very dependent upon its use in terms of the outcomes that come about. And if it's used in a psychotherapeutic setting, it very much has a psychedelic response to it. And so that's what I'm about to show you here. Okay. And Elon, let me know if you guys have any problems with the sound here. Okay, let me say briefly that so what we're working with, I'll put it this way, especially when you're talking about something like trauma, it is fundamentally an experience that people have. It is a threatening, overwhelming experience. And certainly as human beings, we make meaning of it and we tell stories about it. We can put it into words, but fundamentally, it is something that affects our biology. These threat, fight or flight responses, fear responses. And so what you just saw there, what you saw that this person's muscles accomplished, is that his system is able to, his autonomic nervous system is able to engage these traumatic memories that come up, and they get played out through the body in this way. So something to notice is how impossible it would be to put the amount of charge that you just saw there, how impossible it would be to express that in language. And then two, how effective his body was at actually channeling that. So what you saw there and what you'll see with all of these people in these clips is that there's an escalating wave pattern where they're having these nervous system responses that increase in intensity, they peak, and then they calm all organically and by themselves. So in other words, these people are not orchestrating these movements. These are all movements that are coming from their autonomic nervous systems. Okay. And I think this next person will demonstrate that even more. So again, this is a person who's working with a battlefield event where they needed to run away to save their life.
Run faster. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. Okay. I was yelling at the guys to run to the hole faster.
So what you're seeing here is he's at a part of his memory where his the nervous system had a great deal of charge in it, and then him being in a psychedelic state, it's much more accessible. It's much easier for his nervous system to engage that charge and express it versus when he's in his ordinary state of consciousness. And I would say that's true of any psychedelic. Right now, this is cannabis. But I've been in hundreds of hours of MDMA sessions clinically, and we see responses very similar to this, right? And we had a pilot program in Amsterdam working with psilocybin, and you also see responses similar to this. Again, this is the nervous system working, and it becomes amplified by the psychedelic state, right? So he completes this intense activation wave and then continues to move through the story until he hits another intense activation wave that his body processes, and then he keeps moving. And we'll find that people will hit maybe 4 or 5 of those in one 2-hour block of therapy time.
You're gonna get shot by artillery.
And now this person is going to be demonstrating something a little different here. So the first 2 people you saw had what we call sympathetic nervous system responses, meaning fight or flight reactivity, anxiety, panic attacks, muscle contraction, vasodilation, things like that. This person is demonstrating another side of the world of complex trauma, or the other side of PTSD, which is dissociation, right? So when a threat is so overwhelming to a person's system, sometimes they will cease to have fight or flight responses, and they'll begin to have dissociative, numbing, or depressive responses. So my sense is that there's a great deal of what we call depression that is really sort of trauma-based depression. Not 100%, of course, but I think there are many roads that lead somebody to be depressed, but certainly being traumatized is one of them. And so what you're about to see here is this person, the medicine process engaging her parasympathetic nervous system, which again feels cold, it feels numb, it feels like a blank affect, no emotions. And then it processes through that, and then underneath it, then we begin to see the anxiety responses before we see a person move to a neutral states.
It's like a cold, slow motion wave. And it goes all the way down into my digestive system, freezing everything. And slow motion wave, now it's going to the right, like a cold, icy wave. Deep ocean.
Freezing things.
Yeah. And it's just flowing over to the right now, freezing everything in its path.
Does that mean it freezes emotions as well, or just body?
Everything. I feel like Spock.
Okay.
I feel cold.
Okay.
Literally cold.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a fist.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh.
Watch the fist. Let it do its thing. Let it do its thing.
Oh. My heart's beating really fast.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. Stay with it. Stay with it.
Oh.
Scary? Yeah, yeah. Stay right there. If you need my hand, I'm right here. If you need contact, I'm right here. But stay with it.
It's like it's fury that's protecting me. It's just I'm so mad.
Yeah.
Oh.
Let it do it all by itself. Let it do it all by itself.
It's like the fear is underneath the fury. It's really cold.
Yes. Yes. Let it all surprise you. Yeah, confusing, fury, and fear all at the same time.
Oh. Coming back to life. It's unflinching around my eyes and my chest and my hands. My diaphragm. My heartbeat. Oh, yeah, God. Oh, God. Yeah, this is that expanding out of having been encased feeling. Like I'm able to fully expand. I'm not contained. Freedom.
Okay, let me show you guys one more video clip that I think you'll find interesting. So this person is, his name is Paul Antico, and Paul is the president of the Los Angeles Psychedelic Society, and he's a former student. We ran a training before all of the West Coast got shut down from COVID. We were able to run a training in Los Angeles, and Paul was one of our students there. And so in our trainings, people actively use either cannabis, or if they have a prescription, they can use ketamine as well. And so we give supervised trades for people to give and receive these sessions, because fundamentally, you have to have experience in that space yourself before you can guide other people in there, right? It's too hands-on to do it just theoretically. And so one of the things that we saw in Paul's sessions was that his chest would get tight and his breathing would become very constricted. And so after our 5-day training was over, he asked if I would give him a session. And so that's what this is. And what it turns out is that he starts having these memories of being 12 or 13 years old, and he's laying on the bathroom floor, and his father is enraged, and he's kicking him, so hard that he's knocking the air out of his lungs. And so we found that, again, this was a pattern that his body kept taking him to. But I think because it was in a training situation and there was other people around and the people working with him were students, it didn't get to fully express in that particular training. But this is a day after the training, and then I'm running a session for him, and this is what happens. Stay with it. Stay with it, buddy. Let it get as big and as tight as it needs to be. I just want to pause here for a moment, guys, and take a look at his neck. Take a look at how much tension is in his neck, and look at the veins that are popping in his neck. So in other words, when his head is pulled back like that, he's not just resting it back there. He's not just laying it back there. His muscles are incredibly tight. And again, the autonomic nervous system has the capacity to engage your entire body in a response, and that's what's happening here. So that's we'll talk about it in just a little bit, but one of the big interventions that we have is to have people inhibit their voluntary coping strategies, their voluntary coping mechanisms. We inhibit those, and it makes room for involuntary nervous system responses to emerge. And so that's what's happening in all of these clips that you're seeing. Feel what's pulling your neck and head back like that. There you go. There you go. Back arching. There you go. You got this. There it is. Stay with it. Stay with it. Yeah. Stay in there. Stay in there. Okay. So first of all, I do want to say that that is disturbing to watch. I understand that. Hang on, let me. Oop, wrong button. Okay. I know that that is disturbing to watch, but guys, so what I want to communicate about this is that there is a beautiful way that the body, the memory that's of the events that have shaped us, the memory of traumatic events, is not just a conscious memory that we have. It's memory that extends into our bodies. It's memory that extends into our muscles. And so when people are renegotiating, reprocessing these states, we find that the body it emerges those memories in a way that it begins to reenact it, right? It reenacts the threat. So we find that reenactment compulsion and the compulsion for mastery very active in the psychedelic state. So you'll notice that in those clips, and especially that last one with Paul, we didn't tell anybody to, tighten their body or contract their chest or contract their breathing or do this or do that. All we're doing is saying, trust the process, stay with your body process and allow it to play itself out. And what we see is that it has this real wave-like capacity, pattern to it, where again, you get this escalating series of nervous system responses and growing in intensity until it peaks. And then there's this gradual gradual organic calming on the other side of that wave. And something you'll be surprised to hear is that people don't necessarily have big insight after this, right? So I know most of therapy and certainly most of psychedelic integration theory is all about insight, that, oh, well, what does this mean for your life? Or that those types of questions, which I think are wonderful questions. But the suggestion, what I want to pose to you here is that insight is secondary, right? When we're talking about fundamentally shifting the reactivity, fundamentally shifting the patterns that are going on here, that is a nervous system function, and that may or may not involve any insight whatsoever, right? And so I'll tell you, personally speaking, when I do this work, I'm relieved that it doesn't rely on insight. I'm relieved that I don't have to remember anything or write anything down, that the shifts are just happening at the level of my nervous system. And that's where the shifts are what I would call bottom up, right? And so, Ilan, I'm aware of the time here. I'm only just at the beginning of this presentation, but again, I can refer people to the article in the journal. So I'm happy to do this however you want. I can go further or whatever you would like.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Are you able to go a bit further?
Yeah, happy to.
Just for 5 more minutes. I was just fascinated as well.
Okay, perfect.
And then there are some questions which are cropping up in the chat, which we'll go to. And then if you can close off in about 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So I will run very quickly through something that it's a nervous system response map that we use, and it's very useful in therapy, and I think it's extremely useful in psychedelic therapy, right? So again, fundamentally, we are focused on autonomic nervous system responses. And if you're asking what is the autonomic nervous system, well, think about it this way, that right now you're listening to me give this lecture and your mind is trying to understand this, but at the same time your heart is beating, your blood pressure is being regulated, your blood sugar is being regulated, your temperature is being regulated. uh, there are hundreds and hundreds of physiological functions that your body is doing without your awareness and without your your involvement whatsoever. And this is all the more true when you're talking about stress and trauma responses, right? So if we're talking, there are two sub branches to the autonomic nervous system that get involved when we're talking about stress and trauma. So there's the sympathetic nervous system, which handles fight or flight responses. It handles fear, anxiety, panic attacks, anger, things like, that involve like constriction. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is the other side of the coin. It involves numbing responses. So, sleep, for example, is a parasympathetic nervous system response. Digestion is a parasympathetic nervous system response. Soothing and calming are parasympathetic responses, but so are so are dissociation and depression, right? So with that in mind, here is a quick map that we use of the autonomic nervous system, right? So the basic theory here is that threat equals activation of your nervous system. So if we look at it and something like this, right, where if the x-axis is threat level, and anything an organism perceives as threatening can be put there. It could be being in a car accident, it could be being assaulted, it could be being a child that's left alone. If your system perceives a threat, it's on that x-axis. The y-axis is what your nervous system does about it, right? So let's take a quick example here. Uh, let's say that we're all just zebras in the wild, right? And it's a calm, sunny day. We're eating grass, and then the wind is blowing, right? And there's some rustling in the bushes nearby. And when you're in the wild, rustling in the grass could be the wind blowing the grass, or it could be a predator, right? So let's say the grass is rustling, and we look over, and it's just the wind, right? So basically, we have a little bit of activation here, right? And our nervous system jumps up a little bit, and we have a startle response. And you and I have this. Like, let's say you're driving in your car and you need to slam on your brakes because all of a sudden you're about to hit the car in front of you or something like that, or you lose control of the car because it's raining too hard or something like that. In that instance where the threat goes up, your nervous system goes up to respond very quickly, right? And it's not a choice. It's an autonomic response, right? So, and let's even just take the example of you walking down the street and you're on your cell phone and you trip, right? And you're talking on your phone, but in that instance of tripping, the threat level goes up because you're about to fall down on the sidewalk, and your body does this incredible orchestration of responses. Like, your legs get tight, your solar plexus gets tight, your breathing gets tight and shallow, your arms come out in front of you, your neck and head go back to protect your brain from a fall, right? All of this happens in a fraction of a second, and you did not choose any of it to happen, right? So let's say that very briefly, there are, if I'm going to stay within the time limit here, there are what are known as attractor states in the autonomic nervous system, right? And they look something like this. So again, state 0 is calm, and it's a relaxed state. It's a neutral state. And then state 1 is a nervous system state in the mammalian autonomic nervous system that tends to hold onto stress responses. And these are adaptive responses, guys. So again, let's pretend that we're all zebras, right? And we're being stalked by a lion. And if you've ever seen these National Geographic specials, a lion can stalk her prey for an hour or two until she finds the perfect zebra and the perfect situation before attacking. Right. So basically, there's no safety in nature. So basically, we see the lion and she's stalking us, and all of our nervous systems enter the state one trough. And state one is defined by these symptoms, right? So increased energy, fear, anxiety, hyperalertness, excitement. So when, for example, if you were to fly in an airplane and jump out of an airplane with a parachute, you would be in a high stress state. But it's also kind of fun. If you go on a roller coaster, you're entering this nervous system state. If you go to see a horror movie at the movie theaters, you're entering this nervous system state. And guys, if you think about this, these are all conditions that people would go to therapy for, right? Fear, anxiety, anger, hypervigilance, insomnia, right? But if you consider that, where some of these symptoms are coming from, which is a threat response, they are adaptive and intelligent, right? So if you're being stalked by a wild animal, it's a good idea for your system to not fall asleep, right? If you're walking down a dark alleyway in a city at night, you will be on edge. You will be hyper alert. You'll hear every sound and movement around you, right? Even if there's no danger there, the potential danger is there. And so your nervous system automatically moves into this state, right? But then let's say that the lion finds the perfect zebra to go for, and she launches. And again, if you've seen this on National Geographic, it's amazing. The lion takes off, and then the herd of zebra take off, and all of our nervous system states enter into what we call state 2, or high stress. It's defined as maximum activation, maximum performance, and it's short in duration, meaning that the chase will last 30 seconds or a minute at most, and the lion will either get her prey or she will not get her prey, but either way the chase is over, right? So this is a sprint, it's not a marathon, right? So this are the symptoms of state 2, right? So panic attacks, hyperventilation, racing, sweating, shaking, trembling, overall body tension, rage, terror, right? So again, if you are being assaulted, or if you're in a war zone and you're being shot at, you want all of these symptoms. You want the high-powered energy behind a panic attack, the adrenaline behind a panic attack at your disposal to help you survive, right? But if you're not in a dangerous state and you're having panic attacks, that's when we pathologize it. And then very briefly, animals will hit a point of overwhelm. So let's say you're that zebra that the lion is chasing, and you're going left, you're going right, you're kicking, you're doing everything in your power to escape this lion. And let's say it's not working, right? At which point your nervous system hits a point of overwhelm, and then your parasympathetic reactivity turns on. So basically, so again, state 1 is mild stress, state 2. So here's a way to think about it, guys. State 0 is like living in Hawaii, right? State 0 is like living in paradise. You're calm, you're relaxed, you go there for a vacation. State 1 is like living in New York City, or a big city where it's busy and it's expensive and there's lots of people, and you have to be a little anxious and stressed all the time to just live in that city. State 2 is a panic attack. And state 3 is where you tried to escape a threat and it didn't work. And so your system just starts to shut down and you go numb, right? So here are the symptoms of state 3, right? So this is an opioid state. And I'm not talking about an opioid that you would ingest. I'm talking about your brain's own natural release of opioids. So we see lethargy here, sleepiness here, heaviness here, collapsed posture, lessening muscle tension, fogginess or dissociation. People will feel very heavy here, like they'll feel like their head is made of lead, or their legs are bolted to the floor or something like that. They'll feel cold, right? So the body's shifting blood flow patterns here. Nausea is a very common condition of state 3. Confusion is a very common condition of state 3. Slowed thinking. So in states 1 and 2, you have fast thinking, right? Because everything is sped up, it's faster. In state 3, everything is slowed down, right? And confused. Suicidality happens in state 3. This is the first and last time on this nervous system map that we see suicidality arise. And I don't have time to tell you why, but trust me on that one. And then hopelessness, right? If we're talking about somebody living in state 3, right? This is the definition of hopelessness. Everything, all their active fight or flight defensive responses have failed them. So their system turns on passive defensive responses, which involve, an experience of hopelessness. And then finally, so state 3 is when, let's say that the zebra, the lion has tackled the zebra, and the zebra is just stunned, but not completely dead yet. And guys, if you're interested, I'll be happy to send Ilan this presentation. So if you want to look at the slides, you're welcome to. I know I'm going very quickly.
Yes, we can share these out tomorrow with a thank you note.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
And also,
and
if
then,
you're able to share some of the links to the clips, they're just fascinating.
Oh, I'll be happy to. Yeah. We can send out a little email with a bunch of some interesting resources connected to it, including that white
please
paper.
send them to me, and then I'll share them with everybody this afternoon.
Perfect. And then, guys, one quick thing. Let me back up here because I think this is really relevant, and then we'll just end here, even though we're not finished with the map. Right. So this is from Bessel van der Kolk, who you may be familiar with. He's a very famous traumatologist and researcher in the US. So I'm just going to read the part in orange here. 2 decades after the original trauma, opioid-mediated analgesia developed in subjects with PTSD in response to a stimulus resembling the traumatic stressor, which we correlated with the secretion of endogenous opioids equivalent to 8 milligrams of morphine. So basically, he wrote this paper. He did this research in 1994. And so he's talking about US war veterans from the Vietnam War, which was in the 1970s. And he said that 20 years after the war, they would bring these veterans in and they would give them some exposure, like some sound or sight or a smell of the war. And these veterans would just completely dissociate, right? And they said that the amount of morphine that they needed to give to somebody to match that level of dissociation was 8 milligrams of morphine, which I don't know if you know, but that's a lot of morphine. In hospital settings, they use 2 to 4 milligrams for severe breakthrough pain, right? So 8 milligrams is extraordinary. And then, of course, and I'll leave you with this question: what happens when a psychedelic response meets an opioid response? Right? And I can answer that question for you. I won't just leave you hanging with it. But basically what we see here is when dissociation emerges in the psychedelic session, because dissociation is based on an opioid response, what we see is that the dissociation can shut down the psychedelic, right? And we see this in MDMA work all the time. We see it in psilocybin all the time, where people will be an hour and a half, 2 hours into an MDMA journey, which should be the high point of the journey, and they feel like they're completely unaltered. They feel like they can take off their eye mask and just go about their day because nothing is happening. And when in fact what's happening is that what the medicine is revealing is dissociation, is the fact that they have a lot of this numbing state 3 response in their nervous system. And we absolutely saw this with psilocybin as well. When we were in Amsterdam, we had some decent percentage of people that were, I would say, were complete non-responders to psilocybin. And I had the chance to interview some people who were in the research world around this, and they had a similar experience as well. So with that, it's saying that I think these medicines are beautiful. I'm so ecstatic that they're here, that they're moving through the approval process. I think it's a game changer for the world of mental health. And I think there's a lot of intelligence and precision that we can bring to the picture in terms of the forms of psychotherapy that we need to develop to make best use of these medicines. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Ilan.
Fantastic. Right. I think if we can just do a few minutes of questions and answers, and I'm sure Saj is more than happy to answer some of the questions. Now, there are some questions on the chat, but I really thought that perhaps people could ask their questions live. So I'm going to allow people to then unmute themselves. And I guess it's, first to whoever wants to unmute and ask the question, please go for it. Yeah. If not, I'm more than happy to ask some of the questions which have been posted in the chat.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Who's speaking?
This is Laura speaking.
Hi, Laura.
Hi. I was wondering how you set up the set and setting in order to prime people in the right way for them to have such a somatic experience.
Yeah, that's a great question, Laura, and one that we do focus on. Basically, we do a process called selective inhibition, which is somewhat quite, again, if you look at the white paper that we've published, it goes into the details of it, but you have to prime people to discover that nervous system pathway before you bring the medicine on board. Because if you don't, then they're going to default to what they know best, which for most people is a semantic, verbal, insight-based channel. And which again, I'm saying I think that can be a very useful channel, but I don't think it holds nearly the same capacity to process anxiety, stress, and panic and dissociation patterns as the autonomic nervous system does.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you have to prepare them beforehand. Absolutely.
Yeah, I work with chronic pain patients, and the sort of automatic pilot for them is so heavily linked to their pain experience, but it's a very somatic one, but it's in a very rigid way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I'd be keen to check that out. Thanks.
Yeah. And I'll say it doesn't take that long. Typically the protocol that we have at our clinical site is that we have 3 preparatory sessions for people. These are even people that don't have any relationship to their body whatsoever. Excuse me, which most people with trauma don't, right? Most people with trauma are fairly alienated from their body. And so it only takes, I would even say less than 3 preparatory sessions to have them discover that autonomic pathway. And then as soon as you bring the medicine on board, it will take that pathway. It's so much more significant than cognitive channels.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I will ask one question which came up on the chat. So the question is asking, why is it that using these substances in a recreational setting doesn't trigger a somatic response like this, but how is it that in the clinical setting it does? Is it a different type of strain, or is it a higher dose of the medicine?
No, not at all. Great question. I'm sorry. Okay. No, that's a great question. No, you'll have people that are, at least with cannabis, it's not a dose response at all, guys, right? It's much more a, yeah, we'll have people taking like between 5 and 10 milligrams of cannabis and having really powerful somatic responses to it. I think it's the nature of psychedelic medicine that they are incredibly responsive to the environment, right? So most of the time when we think of, we think of set and setting, we think of a person's internal psychological state, and then we think of their environment and what's going on around them. I think to that list, I would add modality. I think modality does matter. I don't think cognitive behavioral therapy, you're going to get the same kinds of results that you get with more experiential focused therapies like somatic therapies. And then I would also put, the relationship as a big player in the, clients are constantly assessing what their environment, what the person that they're working with, what they can hold, right? And so if their assessment is like, oh, this is an appropriate container for this deep trauma work, then the medicine in combination with their mind will go there.
So then following that, how does, I guess, rehashing that traumatic event and I guess discharging that energy help somebody heal from their PTSD?
Well, fundamentally, I think PTSD is that energy, right? What we find, so this is a brilliant question, Ilan, because one of the reason, I'll put it this way. There are many people that we do this work with that they don't need to do much around integration afterwards, right? And I think what I mean by that is fundamentally the symptoms of PTSD, the reactivity, the anxiety, all these symptoms are fundamentally nervous system based symptoms. They're biological symptoms. You know, that's what one of the things that we're trying to communicate with that nervous system map. So if you know if your nervous system is perpetually at a heightened state of activation or a more dissociative state of activation, you're just going to experience your world through the symptoms that are inherent to that nervous system state, right? So if you live in state 3 because your childhood was traumatic and overwhelming, then you know there's going to be just lots of opioids moving in through your system that prevent you from feeling a whole lot, right? And so I would suggest that what trauma fundamentally is a biological nervous system response, and if you can address it at that level, then the cognitive shifts that happen above and beyond that take place far easier, right? So, in other words, I think the difficult part of treatment is, you know, the pattern, the charge that is inherent in the body, and once that has shifted, then the belief systems fall much more easily, in my experience of it.
And then arguably the integration is possibly the most important part of this session or post-session.
Again, no. I mean, we had a lot of people. So our sessions are 2 hours in length, and if people finish up by an hour and a half or an hour and 40 minutes or something like that, they'll take the last 20 minutes and do integration work, right? Because they're moving back into their conscious, rational mind. And we had a lot of patients that just didn't want to do any more integration beyond that between sessions, right? So again, I think the heavy lifting here is happening at the level of the nervous system. It's not happening at the interpretation of that. Yeah.
How do they describe that, I guess, that 20-minute window of, I guess, mini integration? Is it like an out-of-body experience? Is it them seeing their trauma from a third-party point of view?
You mean how do they experience it? How do they describe the experience of going through that?
After they've come down and then they've had time to then rehash their experience in the session with you. How do they describe it?
Well, they don't describe it as. I think they're in the experience of it much more. So let's say, state 3, and we didn't get to the final nervous system state on that map, which is state 4, but those are both highly dissociative states, right? And so one of the things that people will have when they enter those states is, a feeling of disconnection, right? A feeling of floatiness, a feeling of being disembodied. And then that gradually starts to shift and they become more and more embodied. And the idea is that the further you are left on that map, the further you are closer to state 0, the more associated you are to your experience. Wow. And I think fundamentally what's happening with psychedelics is, psychedelics have a fantastic potential to disengage our secondary consciousness, it disrupts the default mode network, and what we're left with is a much more animalistic, highly experiential, emotional, somatic reality that we get to operate in. And so I guess our suggestion is, wait, if the psychedelic medicine takes us to primary consciousness and a visceral reality that way, then shouldn't our therapeutic interventions also point in that same direction? Right. So that's where we're going with it.
And then also sorry, Zoe wanted to know if you also incorporate hypnotherapy into these sessions.
Oh, we don't, but that's just because that's not something we're familiar with. And it's not any, but I understand hypnotherapy is trying to do the same thing, right? Like,
well, it's an altered state of consciousness as well. You just
exactly right. And so I think it could be some very interesting things could come out if somebody chooses to engage something like hypnotherapy with psychedelics. They're such a fantastic tool to put us in that consciousness to begin with.
Yes.
Right. So yeah.
All right, fantastic.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
I've got one about the halo effect. I work with people with multiple chronic complex traumas, and I'm just wondering if this would perhaps work with one or two, and the effect would then spread and help to neutralize other traumas too.
Yeah, again, great question. It's always been a question for us because we can do this work without medicine, and then we can obviously do it with medicine because, again, medicine, I think, is just a facilitator of our own innate intelligence and our own innate healing capacity. And so one question that we've always had is, do you need to take out trauma one by one until the whole system gradually calms? And that's how we used to have to do it, simply because if you try to bite off more than you can chew, then people get bogged down and you can't process anything at that point. And I think one of the beautiful aspects of working with psychedelics is that you can't control where it goes. And what we've seen with, various clients, and certainly in our pilot studies that we've run, is that it tends to go to the most core childhood trauma that people have first, and then build on top of that. It's almost like it says, these medicines say, no, you have to address your foundation first upon which you stand, and then you get to build upon that. So I think there is a halo effect once things like attachment get addressed. Once childhood trauma becomes addressed, then many things become easier after that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have another question. Do you have any recommendations for other types of somatic therapies that are not psychedelic in nature, but are a really good kind of starting point for getting more into the somatic side of things?
Well, the most famous somatic therapies that are out there are Peter Levine's work, like somatic experiencing, of course. But I think it depends on what your goal is with it. I think all somatic therapies have some fundamentals in common, which is, they all rely on Eugene Gendling's work with focusing, right? That basic principle of paying attention to interoceptive, proprioceptive information coming from the body, and then what you do with that is very different. So the Peter Levine's work uses that pendulation model where you touch the trauma, then you touch a resource, and then you just go back and forth like that. I don't think that fundamentally works well with the psychedelic state, because again, the psychedelic has a mind of its own in terms of you're not guiding it that way. And so I think that there's a number of somatic modalities out there, and then there's ones that like what we're doing, which are specifically geared for the psychedelic state. But there's a few out there. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. So that was fantastic. I think let's just close off here, and I'll share with you the last few slides. And if there's any other questions, you guys are more than welcome to please email us, and then we are more than happy to pass them on to Saj. I'll get Kim to post the email address in the chat now. So then, speaking about the work that we are doing, so MMA has started a psychological support service, and a lot of that is to help patients who are seeking these treatments or do need some help with their integration. We do have a network of psychologists, also psychotherapists, and also social workers. It's a whole array. So if anybody wants to contact us, we are more than happy to please put you in touch. And also Tim Ferriss once said that, there's basically no other opportunity to help any particular sector grow or expand as much as the psychedelic network. And, you know, we are a registered charity, and we do need support from the public to help us with the work that we are doing. So please do support us. Also, how you can help. We do have the state chapters. We've got the link in the chat there as well. We are holding more events like this. We have some great sessions coming up, which I will speak about later. Please speak to your doctors, get them, you know, focus on these treatments. Speak to your local member of parliament, and, you know, stay tuned for more details about the summit that we're going to have in November, and hopefully Saj can travel by then. So if you want to come to Australia for the conference, we do
would love to. Would love to.
And also, like I said, we have launched Australia's first certificate in psychedelic assisted therapies. It's a phenomenal program. It's the first cohort of 50 students started last week. That cohort is made up of psychiatrists, GPs, social workers, psychologists as well. We've got an amazing faculty from, you know, from people like Gabor Mate to even Rick Doplin. We've got David Nichols coming up as well. Please go and check out the website. We do implore you to apply for next semester's intake, and also the dates for 2022 and also 2023 are on our website. If you are considering applying, there are some scholarships available as well, so please do write to us. Finally, the summit is coming up in November, so we've got Dr. Doblin coming in from MAPS, David Nutt from the UK, Gabor Mate. We've also got Johan Hari as well. Just a phenomenal lineup. And we do look forward to seeing everybody there as well. So that will be held at the Sofitel in Melbourne, Australia. And finally, the upcoming events. Our next webinar will be on the 23rd of February that will be on the 23rd of February with Dr. Gabor Mate. And then in March, we've got, towards the end of last calendar year, Saj, MMA signed an agreement with Emerald Clinics. We are working on developing a protocol to actually give these treatments in Australia. So that session will be focused purely on that and the work that we're doing to help develop a treatment protocol suited for the Australian market as well. Then we've got Dr. Carhart-Harris from the UK speaking about psilocybin versus SSRIs. And then also Dr. Gabby Leibs, who was involved with the end-of-life trials in the US. She'll be speaking in April, and I've got some sessions lined up in May, which I'll confirm and then post them to the website. And I think based on the demand from today, I'm going to ask Saj to give a second session. So I'll email you. There's just so much to cover. Fantastic.
Great, happy to.
Yeah. So that's all from us for today, and I appreciate everybody giving up their lunchtime. Thank you so much. Just phenomenal. Please stay tuned for more details and for more events coming up, and we will be in touch shortly.
Great. Take care, everyone.